Hello guys, what's up? Welcome back. Here's your guy Emmanuel Gijon, and in today's video we're going to see how to create users in Linux. So in my last video I explained what a user is in Linux, or who is a user in Linux, and I also gave you guys the 4 types of users that are in Linux. If you have not watched that video, please make sure you go watch that video before you watch this video. So in today's video we're going to learn how to create users, how to assign permissions to users, how to delete users. We're going to learn how to create groups, how to assign permissions to groups, and how to add users inside of groups, and also how to remove users from specific groups, right? So that's what we're going to be doing today. So before I start this video, please do take some time to subscribe to this YouTube channel. I've noticed that 80% of people that are watching my YouTube videos have not yet subscribed to my channel. So please, if you feel like you want to encourage me to keep making videos, please take some time to hit that subscribe button, and I'll be more than happy if you do it. So without taking much of your time, let's get started. So I'm back here in my machine, right? As you can see, I'm currently logged into my server as Ubuntu, and if I run the command who am I, you see it's going to say Ubuntu. So the first thing I want us to do is I want us to first of all know how to check how many users are on our server, or how many users are on our Linux operating system. So there are 2 ways you can check. The first way is that you can do a cd to the root directory, you do an ls, and you go inside of the home directory. So I'll do a cd home, hit enter, then you do an ls. Then inside of the home directory, you're going to see a folder here called Ubuntu, and this folder or directory is the user home directory of the user Ubuntu. So if you create another user, for example John, Michael, Alice, Emmanuel, we're going to see their directories right here. Now the issue with checking users on your system by going into the user home directory is that not all users have a user home directory. In my last video I said there were 4 types of users. You had the root user, you had regular users, and you had system accounts and service accounts. And I also said system accounts and service accounts, they do not have a user home directory, even though they are users on the Linux operating system. So the best way to check your users is to use this command right here. So what I want to do, first thing first, let me just cd into Ubuntu. I'm going to clear my screen, and I'm going to use the command cat/etc/password, and I'm going to hit enter. Now when you use this command cat/etc/password, is going to list all the users that are on your Linux operating system, or all the users that are on your Linux server. As you can see here, we have the root user, and we also have Ubuntu right here, and all of these right here are different users that are on our system. Remember, there are 4 types of users. You have root, you have regular users, you have system users, and you have service accounts. So some of these right here are service accounts. For example, this is a service account right here, and right here also we have a system account as well. So as you can see, there are a couple of users on our Linux operating system. Now another command we can use is I can do a cat etc/password, then I can pipe this, and I will say word count -l, and I will hit enter. As you can see, it says 35. So since each line in this file represents a user, it means there are approximately 35 users on our server right now. So basically what this command does is that it gives you an idea of how many lines are inside of this file right here called password. So if I go back inside of that file, you're going to see that we have our current user right here called Ubuntu. But the question now is, what is this X right here? What is this 1000? What is this other 1000? In short, what is all of this, right? And in this video, I'm going to explain that. But before I explain all of this, let's create a user. So I'm going to start by creating a user called Emmanuel. So in Linux, there are 2 commands you can use to create a user. You can do an @user, and you can also use a user at. So the first one we're going to use in this video will be the at user. So I'm going to say at user. I'm going to say at user Emmanuel Chijo, and I'm going to hit enter. As you can see, we don't have the permission to add a user. The error message says other root may add a user or group to the system, right? Other root has the powers to add a user or a group to this system, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to use the sudo command. Sudo here stands for super user do. So what the sudo command does is that it allows us, or it permits us to borrow some powers from the root user and use it to create or to run our command. So what we're doing right now, when we say sudo, we're basically borrowing some powers from root in order to run this command right here. So I'm going to do a sudo add user Gijon, and I'm going to hit enter. It's going to ask me for the password of the user. So I'm going to do password. I'm going to put his password in there. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to ask me for his full name. So I'm going to put his full name in here. It's going to ask me for a room number. I'm just going to put a random number. It's going to ask me for a phone number, so I'm just going to put a random phone number. And it's going to ask me for a home phone number. No, I'm just going to hit continue. Yes, everything looks good. And as you can see, it says adding user Emmanuel Gijon to group users. So let's go and check to see if that user was added. So what I'm going to do is cat/etc/passwords. Then I'm going to hit enter. Now, if you look carefully right here, you're going to see that the user Emmanuel was added. Now, let's understand, what we're looking at right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my screen, and I'm going to use that cat command one more time. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a pipe grep Emmanuel Gijon. I'm going to hit enter. So what I'm doing with this command right here is that I'm asking the system to only print, the line that has the words Emmanuel Gijon in it, right? As you can see, this is that user right here. So let me explain what we are looking at right here. So the first thing you're looking at right here is the username of this user. And the username was given during the creation of this user. Then the second thing you're looking at right here is the password of this user. And this X is simply indicating that the password of this user is stored in another file. By the way, the password of this user is stored in a shadow file. And if we do a cat etc/shadow and we hit enter, it says we don't have permissions. That's fine. So I'm going to do a sudo. I'm going to hit enter. And if you, check right here, you're going to see that this is the password of that user called Emmanuel Gijon. But what I want you to understand is that this is not the actual password, right? This is the hash version of the password. Now, don't worry about what hashes are. Now, the fact that this is a hash version does not mean that you can expose this password, because if you do, hackers can find this hash version, they would crack it, and they would get the actual password of this user, and they may use it to log into your account, right? So the fact that it's in a hash version does not mean that you can just expose it. You still have to protect it. So what I want to do is I want to go back to that my command, this command right here. So what you're looking at right here is the password. Now, what you're also looking at right here is the ID of the user. And because this is a regular user, the ID of this user will always start with 1000. As you can see, this is 1001. And now this is what they call the group ID. Let me explain something. When you create a user in Linux, a group for that user is also created. So when I created the user Emmanuel Gijon, a group was also created called Emmanuel Gijon. And this group belongs to the user Emmanuel Gijon. And right here is the ID of that group that was created when the user Emmanuel Gijon was created. And here you have some personal information about that user, right? And another thing you're going to see here will be the user home directory of this user. And you're also going to see the default shell that this user is using. In this case, this user is using a /bin/bash shell. Now, another thing we can do here is that if I do an ls-l and I do a /home, you're going to notice that a user home directory was created for this user Emmanuel Gijon. So now we have two user home directories inside of the home directory. Let's add another user. So we're going to assume that this user, Emmanuel Gijon, is a DevOps engineer. So we want to add another DevOps engineer to our system, right? So what I'm going to do is, instead of using the @user command, I'm going to use the user command, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a sudo user and I'm going to call this user Alice. So I'm going to call this user Alison, or let's say Alice Johnson. That would be the user. And I'm going to hit enter. I want you to notice a couple of things. One, this command didn't ask us to put a password or to give a name or to put a room number. It didn't ask us none of that. It went straight and it created that user. Now let's check if we're going to see that user. So if I do a cat/etc/password and I hit enter, you're going to notice that there's a new user on our system called Alice, right? Let's see. So if I do, let me clear my screen, and I'm going to do a cat/etc, and I'm going to grab Alice. I'm going to hit enter. Now, there are a couple of things I want you to notice. The first is that this is the username of that user, and it's saying that there's a password for that user. But the question is, did we give this user a password? No, we did not. So here is the user ID of that user, and here is the user ID of the group of that user, and here is the user home directory of that user. Now, this is something I want you to pay attention to. So let's go see if this home directory exists. So I'm going to do an ls-r, and I'm going to do a/home, and I'm going to hit enter. You're going to notice that even though we check this user right here, it's telling us that there's a user home directory, but in reality, that user home directory was not created. Now, when you use the user command, it doesn't create a user home directory unless you pass an option for the user home directory to be created. Let me show you. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete this user from our system, right? So this is the next command that you're going to learn, the command to delete users. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to do a sudo user there, means user delete, and we're going to specify the user that we want to delete. In this case, we want to delete Alice, Jensen. Then we're going to hit enter. Now, if we do a cat/etc/password, you're going to notice that that user Alice is gone. But let's recreate that user. But this time we want to recreate that user with the user home directory. We want that user to have a user home directory just as Emmanuel has a user home directory. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear our screen right here, and I'm going to do a sudo user and this time I'm going to pass the option -m. It means create home directory, and I'm going to say I want to create a user called Alice Johnson, and I'm going to hit enter. So now if I do a cat/etc/password and I hit enter, you're going to notice that now there's a new user on our system again called Alice Johnson. Now let's see this Alice Johnson and let's understand what's going on here. So I'm going to do a cat/etc/password. I'm going to pipe. Don't worry about what pipe is. I'm going to teach you what pipe is, but for now, just know that I'm going to pipe this. I'm going to create. I'm going to say I want to see only the line that has, Alice in it, right? I'm going to hit enter and this pops up. So right here, the first thing we notice is that there is a username for Alice, which is correct, but it says there is a password. But when we created this user, we didn't give it a password. So why is the system telling us that there's a password? Now, the beauty of Linux is that we can go check if there's actually a password for Alice. So let's go check it out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a cat/etc/shadow and I'm going to hit enter. It says I don't have permissions. That's fine. So I'm going to do a sudo cat/etc/shadow and I'm going to hit enter. As you can see right here, this is that of Emmanuel, right? And we see that Emmanuel actually has a password. Now let's look at that of Alice. So when you look at that of Alice, you're going to see something that looks like an entry for a password, but that's not a password. Why? Because we didn't give it a password when we were creating that user. So let's do something. Let's give Alice a password. So in Linux, there is a command to assign a password to a user or change the password of a user, and that command is simply password. If you type password and you type the user you want to change the password or give or assign the password to, in this case Alice Johnson, right? Then I hit enter. It's gonna say I don't have permissions to modify password. That's fine. So I'm gonna do a sudo, then I'm gonna do, password, then I'm gonna do Alice Johnson. I'm gonna hit enter. Then it's gonna ask me to give her a password. So I'm gonna put her password as Alice. I'm gonna confirm that password Alice, and it say password was successfully updated. So let's check if Alice now has a password. So I'm gonna do, a sudo cat/etc/shadowfile. I'm gonna hit enter. Now you see that there's a password for Alice stored in a hashed format, right? So that's kind of how you assign a password to a user, or how you give a password to a user. So the next thing we're going to do is I want to do something, right? I want to do a cat/etc/password, and I want to pipe this again. I want to do a grape, then I want to do Alice, and I want to hit enter. Now, another thing that you're going to notice is that Alice right here has a different type of shell. So instead of a bash shell like Emmanuel, let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to run this, and I'm going to hit enter. So instead of a bash shell like what Emmanuel has, Alice has a /bin/shell, not /bin/bash shell. But we want Alice to have bash shell because Emmanuel here has bash shell, and when we look at Ubuntu also has a bash shell. So let's give Alice a bash shell. So what we want to do is we want to modify the shell that Alice is using. So I'm going to come back here. So what we want to do is we want to modify the shell that Alice is using. So there's a command for that. So it's sudo user mode, and user mode here stands for user modification. It's a command that makes it possible for you to modify users, or you can modify, you can add things, you can remove things from users, right? That's, you use this command right here. So what we're going to do, we're going to use a user mode, and we're going to say want to modify Alice Johnson, right? And we're going to say --shell, and we're going to specify the new shell that we want Alice to have. So we want Alice to have this shell right here. Then I'm going to hit enter. Now if I run this command one more time, you're going to notice that Alice now has a /bin/bash shell. That's exactly what we want, right? Now let's say, for example, we don't like the username of Alice. We want to modify the username of Alice Johnson. So there's also a command to modify the username of a user in Linux, and that command is sudo user mode, because we want to modify the username of this user -r. R means change login name, and we're going to specify the new name. I want it to be Alice_Johnson, and we're going to specify the old name, which is Alice Johnson. I'm going to hit enter. Now if I grab this user one more time, you're going to see that the username of this user was changed. Now we also want to modify the username of Emmanuel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same command, and I'm going to specify the new name, new username. I'm going to do Gijon, and the old one will be Emmanuel Gijon. I'm going to hit enter. Now if I do a cat/etc/password and I hit enter, you'll notice that the username of Emmanuel has changed, and you also notice that the username of Alice has changed. Now while we're here, let's talk about something. Come, let me show you something. Now when you look at this user right here, so this is the first user that was on our system, the first regular user that was on our system, and that was Ubuntu right here. Now when you look at the user ID of Ubuntu, you're going to notice that the user ID of Ubuntu is 1000. So because Ubuntu was the first regular user on our system, Ubuntu was assigned the user ID of 1000. The second user we created was Emmanuel, and you'll notice that the user ID of Emmanuel right now is 1001. Then the third user we created right here was Alice, and you'll notice that the user ID of Alice is 1002. So if we create another user, our system is going to assign 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006. So that's how user IDs are assigned to users in Linux. So now on our our Linux operating system, we have two DevOps engineers, Emmanuel and Alice. So what we want to do is we want to ask Emmanuel to add some developers on our system. So let's go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to switch and become Emmanuel. So right now we are Ubuntu, but we want to become Emmanuel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a command su. Su means switch user. The S stands for switch and the U stands for user. So switch user, I'm going to do dash and I'm going to specify the username, that's Emmanuel. Then I'm going to specify the password of Emmanuel. I'm going to hit enter. Now you can see I'm on this server as Emmanuel. And if I run the command, who am I? I'm Emmanuel Gideon. Now Emmanuel wants to add some developers to the system, right? So Emmanuel wants to add some developers. So I'll do a sudo and I will do add user. And I will call that user John_dev, right? To indicate that John is a developer. And I will hit enter. It's going to ask me for Emmanuel's password. So I'm going to put Emmanuel's password here. I'm going to hit enter. Now, look at this error. Pay very, very close attention to this error. What you're seeing here, what is the system saying? The system says that Emmanuel Gideon is not in the Sudoers file. So what is this sudo file they're talking about, right? Now, remember when I was Ubuntu and I tried to add a user and it asked me to use sudo so that it would make it possible for me to add a user? It's simply because Ubuntu is part of a group called sudo. The file that controls who can get into that group and who cannot get into that group is a file called Sudoers. This file we're talking about. So the Sudoers file we're talking about is simply a configuration file that is on our Linux operating system that dictates or control who can use the sudo privileges. Like for example, Ubuntu is inside of that group. Let me show you. So if I switch back to Ubuntu, if I log out, now I'm back as Ubuntu and I simply run the command groups, right? You see, it's not group. Is groups with an S. So I'm going to put an S. I'm going to hit enter. Now you're going to notice that it's going to list all the groups that Ubuntu is a member of. Now let me show you something. Now, when you look at this carefully, it says Ubuntu is a member of a group called Ubuntu. Remember when I said when you create a user in Linux, a group is also created? That's what happened with Ubuntu. So Ubuntu is a member of the group Ubuntu. But most importantly, Ubuntu is a member of a group called sudo. Now, Emmanuel is not a member of this group. Let's go back. Let's switch back to Emmanuel. So I'm going to, switch back to Emmanuel. I'm going to put Emmanuel's password and I'm going to run the command groups. I'm going to hit enter. These are the groups that, Emmanuel is part of. Emmanuel is part of a group called Emmanuel Gideon and is part of a group called users. And now if you check, he's not part of that group called sudo. And that's why Emmanuel cannot use the sudo command. So let's go and add Emmanuel inside of that file so that Emmanuel will be able to add users. Come, let me show you how you do it. So the first thing, you're going to need someone with the permission to edit that file. And guess who? Ubuntu. So we're going to switch back to Ubuntu right here. So I'm back as Ubuntu. I'm going to clear my screen. Then the first command I'm going to run is sudo vi. That's the other way to edit this file, sudo right here, and I'm gonna hit enter. Boom, I'm inside of that file. So this is the file that controls who has the powers on your system to run a command using sudo. Come, let me show you. So if I scroll down, this is where the whole magic happens. These are the people that have the sudo permission. As you can see, root has the sudo permission. Let me explain what we're looking at right here. So we're looking at root right here. We're looking at root, and it says here or, and we have again this or and we have again this or. What does that mean? Let me explain. So basically what they are saying here is that root as a user has the powers to execute on this host system or on all hosts. So root has the powers to execute a command on all hosts, and root has the powers to execute that command as a user or as a group, and at the same time root has the powers to execute all commands, right? So if I add Emmanuel here, Emmanuel will also have the same powers that root has. And right here, this is what they call a group. This is how groups are represented in Linux. So this is a group called admin, and it says members of the admin group may gain root privileges. So if you add someone to this admin group, that person will gain root privileges, right? And this is another group right here known as sudo. And it says all members of group sudo to execute any command. So if you add a user to this group called sudo, that user will have the powers to execute any command they want on your Linux operating system. Let me do something. I don't want to add Emmanuel to any group. I want to make Emmanuel powerful. I want to make Emmanuel so powerful that he can destroy the entire system. I'm not going to add him to a group. I'm going to give Emmanuel root privileges. I'm going to make Emmanuel become a super user on this server. Come, let me show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come right here and I'm going to add Emmanuel underscore Gijon, and I'm going to say I want Emmanuel to do everything that root can do. I want Emmanuel to execute commands on this host. I want Emmanuel to execute it as a user, as a group, and I want Emmanuel to execute any command of his choice on this server. This is dangerous. This is extremely dangerous. This is not something that you would do. If you do it in a real war scenario, you would get fired by your manager. So this is not something that you do, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Control O. I'm going to hit enter. Then I'm going to do a Control S. So now Emmanuel has all the powers. Emmanuel has the same powers that root has. Emmanuel can add users. When we tried to add a user the first time, we noticed that it didn't go through because they said Emmanuel was not part of the Sudoers file, but now he's part of that file. So he can start adding users. So let me show you. So I'm going to switch back to Emmanuel. So I'm going to do a sudo dash Emmanuel Gijon. I'm going to put his password, and as Emmanuel, I'm going to add a user called John. So I'm going to do, sudo at user called John underscore dev, right? So it's going to help me know that this is a developer. So I'm going to hit enter. And it's going to ask me for Emmanuel's password. So I'm going to put his password in here. I'm going to hit enter. Now Emmanuel can create a user. I'm going to put his password as, I'm just going to call this John, right? I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to say John. I'm going to say John. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm just going to say his name is John Develop. Cool. I'm going to hit enter, 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 enter. Yes, enter. Boom. Now Emmanuel was able to create a user on this system. Why? Because he has the sudo permissions to do that. He has the powers to do that. Now let's see if this user exists. So I'm going to do a cat/etc/password and I'm going to hit enter. Now you see there is a user on our system known as John Developer or John Dev or Dave. I don't know how you want to call it, right? But Emmanuel was able to add it, that user. But now here's the thing. We've given Emmanuel so much power. What if we want to give Alice the same power? Alice is part of the DevOps group. So Alice should also have the same powers that Emmanuel has. But here's the thing. You cannot keep giving powers to people directly. It doesn't make sense. That's not how you do it. In Linux, you create groups. So you create a group and you assign some permissions to that group and you add users inside of that group. Now, let me show you. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take Emmanuel off that file because I don't want him acting like root. Because if he's acting like root and someone hacks my server through Emmanuel, that person has root privileges. That person can literally blow off the entire system, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back and become Ubuntu, right? And I'm going to take Emmanuel off that file. So I'm going to do a sudo vi. I'm going to do sudo. I'm going to hit enter and I'm going to take all of Emmanuel's powers, go down here, and I'm going to come right here and I'm going to remove Emmanuel. I don't want him to have, this type of powers. So I'm going to remove him. Then I'm going to do a Control O. I'm going to hit enter and I'm going to do a Control X. Just like that, Emmanuel has lost all his powers. What we want to do is, rather than giving all the powers to Emmanuel, we want to create a group, then give the sudo powers to that group, then add Emmanuel and Alice inside of that group. Let me show you how to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is, let's first of all see all the groups that we have on our system. And that command is cat/etc/group. And you hit enter. So this command is going to list all the groups that are on your system. As you can see, we have a lot of groups. Why do we have so many groups? Simple, because Each time you create a user in Linux, a group is created for that user. That's why there's so many groups, on our system, right? You're going to notice that there's a group for Ubuntu, there's a group for Emmanuel, there's a group for Alice, and there's a group for John. Groups for everybody. So what we want to do is we want to create a new group. I want to call that group DevOps. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clear my screen and I'm going to do a sudo group add, and I'm going to call that group DevOps like that. And I'm going to hit enter. So just like that, a new group was created called DevOps. Now I'm going to do a couple of things. So I'm going to see if that group exists, right? And right here, you will see that there's a new group called DevOps. Now the beauty is that you can also see who are the members of this group by using another command. I'm going to clear my screen and I'm going to do a sudo getting group, and I'm going to specify the name of the group, in this case DevOps. I'm going to hit enter. So that's the DevOps group. And now there's nobody inside of this DevOps group, and it's just an empty group. It doesn't have permissions. So what we want to do, we want to give it sudo permissions. Then we want to add users to that group. How do you give sudo permissions? You have to edit the Sudoers file. Come, let me show you. So what you do a sudo, then you do a vi sudo, and you hit enter. Now you edit the Sudoer file. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here, and right here I'm going to add another group. So I'm going to add that group DevOps. So I'm going to do DevOps, and I want it to have the same permissions as sudo. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it right here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save it, right? So I'm going to do a Control O, hit enter, Control X, and boom. Now that group has the sudo permission. So anyone that's added into that group will have the sudo permissions. Now let's add our two DevOps engineers, Alice and Emmanuel. Let's start by adding Emmanuel. So how do you add a user to a group? How do you do it? You use the user mode, right? We're modifying that user. We're adding that user to a group. So what you're going to do, you're going to do a sudo user mode -g, right? Then you're going to specify the name of the group, in this case, DevOps. And you're going to specify the username of the user you want to add to the group, in this case, Emmanuel. Then you're going to hit enter. Now, Emmanuel is part of that group. How do I know? There are two ways I can know, right? The first way is that I can run the command getting group DevOps, right? And right here, see the group DevOps, it has one member, and that member is Emmanuel, right? And I can also do a couple of things. I can also just do, a cat etc/groups, is group, not groups, right? Right here, boom. See, we have one user, and that user is Emmanuel. We also have to add Alice, because Alice is a DevOps engineer. So Alice should belong to this group. So you do what? You do a sudo user mode -g, then you specify the group DevOps, and you specify the user Alice, and you hit enter. Now Alice is part of that group as well. So if I cut this group, you'll see there's a user here called Alice. And if I use this other command right here, you see, now there are two people in this group. There is Emmanuel and there's Alice inside of this group. Both Emmanuel and Alice has sudo permissions. Now, we've seen Emmanuel perform things on our Linux operating system with a sudo permission. Let's see if Alice can do it. Let's switch to Alice. So I'm going to clear my screen and I'm going to do a su-i, and I'm going to say I want to switch to Alice. I'm going to hit enter. What's the password of Alice? It's Alice. Then I'm going to do Alice. I'm going to hit enter. Now I'm like Alice. So if I do a who am I and I hit enter, boom, I'm Alice Johnson, right? And that's pretty cool. Now, another thing, I can see all the groups that Alice belongs to. So I can just do is groups. So I can do groups. And it says Alice belongs to a group called DevOps. And DevOps has the sudo permission. So let's see if Alice has the sudo permission. So the first thing, we're going to try to add a user. We're going to add another developer. We're going to call that developer Michael. So I'm going to do, this time, I'm not going to do an add user. I'm going to do a user add. That's faster. So I'm just going to do a user add -m. So it creates a home directory. And I'm going to say I want a user called Michael_dev. And I'm going to hit enter. It says Alice does not have the permission to add a user. Why? We didn't use sudo. Let's try to use sudo. And I'm going to add sudo. I'm going to hit enter. It's going to ask me for Alice's password. So I'm going to do Alice. I'm going to hit enter. Now, that user was added. Let me show you. If we do a cat etc/password, we hit enter. You notice that there's a new user called Michael. So now Alice has the powers to add users, and we didn't give those powers to Alice. All we did was to add Alice into a group, and that group had the powers. So because Alice joined that group, she kind of inherited the powers of that group, and now she can use it to do crazy things. She can even create her own group, right? Let's see. Let's create another group. Let's create a group for developers, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my screen and I'm going to create a group for developers. How do we create groups? We do a sudo and we do a group add and we call that group developers and we hit enter. A new group was created called developers. How do I know? If I say cat etc/group and I hit enter, you see? There's a new group right here. There's a new group right here called developers and it was created by Alice. Let's do a couple of things. Let's give this group some permissions, right? Can Alice edit the Sudoers file? Yeah, she can't. Let me show you. So I'm going to clear my screen and I'm going to do a sudo vi sudo. I'm going to hit enter and boom, you see, she can edit the Sudoers file. She has the powers to do that. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to add that new group called developers. But now here's the thing. I don't want developers to have the same permissions that DevOps engineers have. They're developers. The only thing they should do is to restart, a web server. They should restart Nginx. They should restart, Apache. That's the only thing they should do. They are not developers, so they should not have full access to my entire server. Because since they are not system admins and they are not DevOps engineers, if they have full access, they can mess up that server. So we only want to give them the access they need, the ability to restart a web server. Apart from that, they should not do anything else. They should not even install something on our server without our permission. Come on, let's give them that permission. So what I'm going to do, I already have it written somewhere. I'm just going to copy it and I'm going to put it right here. We've added another group called developers, but we've not given them full permission, right? Look at this. Instead of giving them full permission, we only want them to execute these two commands. We only want them to, have the ability to restart Nginx or to restart Apache too. That's the only thing they should do. Why? Because they're developers, right? We can give them permissions. We can give them the ability to create users. We don't want that, right? So what we're going to do next is we're going to save this file, Control O, I'm going to hit enter, I'm going to do a Control X, and let's start adding users inside of that group. How many developers do we have? Let me check. So if I do a cat etc/password, you're going to notice that right now we have 2 developers. So let's add them to that group. So we're going to do a user, we're going to do a sudo user mode, and we're going to do a -g, and we're going to specify the group that's, developers, and we're going to specify the user, in this case, John. We're going to add John. So if I do a sudo user mode -g, let me explain something. If you add a user to a group and during the process of adding that user to that group and it kind of deletes all the groups that that user is part of, there's a command you can use. You can actually append that command. So you can come here and you can add, a -a to append, something like that. I don't really know. If you just add a -a, it's going to prevent that when you add them to a group, other groups are deleted, right? Hope that makes sense. Let me know in the comment section if that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the group developers and I'm going to add our guy, Michael. So now we have our 2 developers inside of the group developers. And the other thing these guys can do is restart web servers. Now let's see if they are in there. So I'm going to do a sudo get in and I'm going to specify group and I'm going to specify developers. I'm going to hit enter. Boom. As you can see, there are 2, users inside of that group, developers. And the only thing they can do as developers is to, restart web servers. Now let's switch to one of those developers, right? So I'm going to switch and I'm going to become John. So I'm going to do a su dash, John. Gonna ask me for John's password. This is John. And now I'm John and John is a developer. Let's see, can John add a user? So let me do a sudo user add, and John wants to add Paul, another developer, right? Maybe he reached out to DevOps engineer and system admin and they were busy and he said, oh, I'm going to add it myself. And boom, password, which is password, hit enter. John doesn't have permissions to add it. Even though John is part of a group that's inside of the Sudoers file and has the sudo permissions, John doesn't have the permission to add users. John is limited because we actually limit the permission of John ourselves, right? So it says user John underscore dev is not allowed to execute this command Paul, right, as root on this server, on this host. right? John is not allowed. Now, John gets frustrated and he wants to delete everything. He goes crazy. He wants to delete everything. So John goes into the root directory. He lists all the directories and he says, you know what? I want to delete every single thing that makes this server work. I want to delete, guess what? The etc directory, because it contains all the configuration of the system. So if it's deleted, the system won't work. So John decides and says, I'm going to use a sudo remove -r, and I'm going to delete etc directory. And he puts in the etc directory, hits enter, put in his password, he hits enter, boom. You see, he cannot delete that directory. He's not allowed to delete that directory. We restricted the permissions of John. He's not permitted to delete that directory. He gets frustrated and he says, you know what? I'm going to delete the boot directory, right? So let's try it. Let's try to delete boot. So I'm going to delete boot. I'm going to hit enter and I'm going to put my, user right here, my password. I'm going to hit enter. It says, sorry, you cannot do that. He doesn't have the permissions to do that. He's limited. Now, while he's doing this, someone finds out. Emmanuel finds out, Alice finds out, system admins finds out, the security team finds out, and they need to kick him out of the group. They need to take him out of the group. Let me show you how to take a user out of the group. But before we can take it out of the group, we have to become someone that can take a user out of the group. So either we become Ubuntu, we become Alice, or we become Emmanuel. I'm going to become Ubuntu, so I'm going to log out. As you can see, now I'm back as Ubuntu. Sorry guys, something happened to my camera, so I'm just going to continue off camera, right? So I'm going to shift this right here, and I'm going to continue off camera. So let's take out John. We have noticed that John is trying to take down our server. So let's take him. Let's remove him from that group. So let's first of all see all the groups that is on our system. So let's do a cat /etc/ group, and let's hit enter. As you can see, there's a group called developers, and John is inside of this group, and John is trying to take down our entire system. So let's remove John. So I'm going to do a sudo, and I'm going to do a g passwords -d delete. Then I'm going to specify the user that I want to remove. In this case, it will be John, and I'm going to specify the group I want to remove John from, and that will be developers. And I'm going to hit enter, and it says removing user John from group developers. So John is no more part of that group called developers. So John has lost all his powers. Now let's delete John because he's trying to do some bad things on our server. So we're just going to do a user there. But before I delete, let me show you something. I'm going to do an ls-r, right? And I'm going to do a /home, and if I delete John, if I use the command sudo user there and and I specify the user John, it's going to delete John, but it's not going to remove the user home directory of John. Let me show you. So I'm going to hit enter, right? Now, if I do a cat /etc/password, you're going to notice that John is gone. So if I do an ls-r and I do a /home, right? You're going to notice that the user home directory of John is still there. It wasn't deleted when we removed John. Why? The reason Linux is doing this is because the user home directory of John is the personal workspace of John, and it contains all the files and configuration and data that belongs to John. So if you delete it and you delete the entire user home directory of John, you can delete some extremely important things that John was working on. Even though John is a hacker and he was trying to take down our server, but there are some files, there's some information that John is working on that we may need in the future. So that's why the system keeps the user home directory of a user when you delete that user. Now if you want to delete the user and the user home directory, now there's another command that you can use. So let's do something. Let's delete this user called Michael, because Michael is also a developer and we don't want developers on our system. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a sudo user there, and we're going to do a -r, and we're going to specify that user Michael. So I'm going to hit enter. Even though it gives you this error right here, that user was deleted. So if I do a cat /etc/ password, you're going to notice that Michael is gone. If I clear my screen and I do an ls-r and I say /home and I hit enter, you're going to notice that it also deleted the user home directory of Michael, right? So that's kind of how you remove users from group and you delete users completely. Now, what if we want to delete groups, right? So to delete groups, I will just do a sudo, group there. And I want to delete that group called developers. I'm going to hit enter. Now, if I do a cat/etc/group, you notice that that group developer is gone. I also want to delete the group DevOps, right? I don't want to keep DevOps, this none. So I will simply do a sudo group there DevOps. Now, when I delete the group DevOps, I want you to know that everyone that's in that group with lose or loss, which one is correct? Let me know in the comment section which one is correct. So they will basically lose all their sudo privileges, and I'm going to hit enter. And now the group is gone. And Emmanuel and Alice, they don't more have sudo privileges on this machine. It's gone as well. The only person with sudo privileges right now is Ubuntu. So guys, that's kind of how you create users in Linux, assign permissions to them, put them in groups, create groups, assign permissions to groups. So that's kind of how you do some fun things in Linux. Thank you for watching this video. Please share this video with someone that's interested in learning Linux. And please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please subscribe. See you in my next video. Bye.